Hello everybody, welcome to the United Stands. I'm Mark Goldbridge and this is your latest Manchester United transfer news. An overspill, really, from the morning show on what we didn't get through. I want to get your thoughts on this. A striker for Manchester United. Reports coming in that we'd look for someone like Danny Welbeck. Is that the sort of striker that you want at Manchester United? An experienced striker. Also, updates around Baleba. It's looking like Baleba to Man United might not happen. I don't believe it, but we'll talk about that as well. And an interesting story coming out about Marcus Rashford on how Rashford's exit from Manchester United was already decided even before Ruben Amorim came in. What does that mean for Rashford's future at United? Could there be a way back when the club pushed him out and he doesn't really want to come back? And a little bit about Morgan Rogers and Elliot Anderson as well. But look, let's start off with I want to start off with the Baleba story very quickly before we talk about the striker and everything else. What are your thoughts on Baleba? I think we've got to start, even I have got to start to believe that it won't happen anyway, because there's been numerous updates. I think we had Ben Jacobs on Thursday saying nothing's really been happening with that for a while. Andy Mitten has said he's not heard anything about it for a while. I think Laurie Whitwell of The Athletic said the same. And then yesterday, Simon Stone said, I'm getting the sense that he's somebody that they're not really keen on when it comes to Baleba. So there's multiple sources now sort of saying it's gone cold on Baleba for Manchester United. Now, look, this is about trust. I was talking about this morning. If you want to be optimistic and excited and you're not on the payroll, that's up to you. But I mean that genuinely, if you're excited, optimistic, fine, absolutely fine. But also respect the fact that some of us are realistic and think, I don't trust this ownership. They do bad things. They do incompetent things. So, look, I would love it if somebody said to me, we're definitely not signing Baleba this summer. I can't really see how they can miss. There's not many, I mean, maybe Edison to a certain extent, but even he I'm not bothered about. You know, I know about Edison. I've known about him for years. We spoke about him on here for years. There's a risk that he's, not played in the Premier League before, but I think his traits as a third or fourth choice midfielder should be okay. Baleba was always going to cost a lot of money. And he's coming off the back of a bad season, and it's big shoes to come in and fill at Man United when he hasn't really shown that maturity yet. But you do worry that Man United might double down on it in the sense that they tried to get him a year ago. But if we don't get him, I think it leaves us with a situation where we have to go and get two decent midfielders. If one of them's not Baleba, you are hoping Tchouaméni, Tonali, Scott, Stiller, Fernandes. So the options are good if we can get two out of those five and swerve Baleba. I'll believe it when I see it, but I have to admit I'm probably just cautious in saying it looks like Baleba and Man United ain't going to happen. But I have to acknowledge that Simon Stone, Ben Jacobs, Laurie Whitwell, Andy Mitten have all said recently that it's not something that's warm with United at the moment. And I suppose just before we move on, that's important as well. Because if we did end up getting him later in the summer, that would show that we failed. In the sense that, was it warm with Sesko this time last year? No, because we were looking for other people. If we end up going to Baleba from this point, it means we failed on everything else we should have been going for. On a striker, let me know your thoughts on that, by the way. On the striker situation, this was in the Manchester Evening News. United won't be dropping big money on another big-name striker. There's faith in Sesko's ability to lead the line for a long time to come. The market the club will focus on is an older head. Someone like Danny Welbeck could be a good fit. Now, a lot of you have said Danny Welbeck. I think Ricky has said it a few times as well. Look, you have to have faith in Sesko. I have, I'm sure many of you have, but we did drop £67 million on him a year ago, and he is a young striker, and he has scored goals, and he should get better. And he has to be our Haaland. He has to be our Ollie Watkins. He has to be our Lewandowski. He's got to be Man United's focal point, our striker. That's what we bought him for. I absolutely do not think we should be dropping big money on another striker. You're undermining the project, Sesko. But what you do need to do is have competition, alternatives, and you never know with injury, etc. as well. So we have to have an alternative to Sesko, but absolutely it has to be somebody that is fundamentally competition, but second in line. So Edison, very good signing. no way is Ederson seen as the guy that's going to play next to Mainu and be the Casemiro replacement. He's an option, but he's not going to be the star, is he? And we're fine with that. So we need like an Ederson up front. Now, I'm not putting Ederson up front, but what I'm saying is we need a player like that you go, that's a decent signing. Okay, it might not work out, but it could really work out for us. So you've got to look at players within that sort of category. Now, Igor Thiago has been mentioned from Brentford. That's very expensive. He's in the Brazil squad. He's going to want to start. So that doesn't work. Danny Welbeck, I think he's 34 now, 1 year left. He just signed a new contract at Brighton. Maybe that's a little bit too far. But I do think that there are options out there. I don't know about the financial. I mean, look, people mention Ivan Toney. Again, he's going to want to play. He's part of a World Cup squad. He's on very good money in Saudi. I don't think Toney would go, yeah, I'll come to Man United and be the bench player. I think he'd come and say, I want to start. And then, you don't want to unsettle Sesko. You want to be, you don't need to justify it to Sesko, but you want to be in a position where you go, look, we're bringing this person in to compete with you. You've got to back yourself and we back you, but they will get game time. You bring someone like Ivan Toney in or Igor Thiago, you're almost saying, look, your place is in jeopardy. So, I mean, yeah, it's difficult. It's difficult to predict what type of striker there is, and I think that's why a lot of people talk about Danny Welbeck. But let me know your thoughts, because you certainly, and you don't want a Liam Delap either. You don't want to be doing that. Now, some people have said, what about Rashford? He can play up front. Interestingly, in the same article, it talks about Rashford, and it said the decision to remove Rashford from the first team squad and try and move him on was led by the club and not one forced by Ruben Amorim. I think this is really important with Rashford. I actually don't have an issue with Rashford now. I think sometimes, Rashford and Martial were my two favourite players however many years ago. And it went wrong. It went wrong with both of them. Martial couldn't stay fit and, sort of fell off. And Rashford, sort of did peak and then dropped. And then there was Belfast and, Brantford, whatever you want to call it. And I thought what he said in that interview at that Christmas before he left on loan, that he needed a fresh challenge. At that point I was sort of like, you know what, that's quite a mature thing to say. I know it caused a lot of problem at the time, but realistically, I think he saw the issue, and that was he needed to get away from United. And since then, his career has gone really well at Villa and Barcelona, and he's back in the England squad. And I'm pleased for him. I said this when Pogba left. It was time to part ways, but I didn't wish Pogba any problems, even though at times he had been problematic. But what you have to understand with Rashford is, and it's the same with Casemiro, when Ineos came in, they wanted to remove Rashford and Casemiro because of their wages. Nearly said wage bill, wages. I don't know whether it was a reflection on them personally, but I think they looked at both players on 300 grand a week or more, and when we're not getting anywhere near what we should be getting out of those players at that price. Now, they couldn't move Casemiro on. Probably fortunate they didn't, considering the season he's just had, but he's gone now. And there was never any talk of Man United renewing his contract. Like, that's a fact. United never approached Casemiro to renew his contract because they wanted that wage gone. And Casemiro's not going to go and earn 100 grand a week or 150 grand a week anywhere, is he? So it was never a conversation. And Amorim got a lot of the blame for Rashford, but I would say that Amorim was basically told in his interview Rashford was a player that needed to be moved on because they'd had their problems before that, Man United. So I think Marcus Rashford coming back to Man United, look, we do need a left winger. We do need someone who can compete with Sesko. Could Rashford do both those things? Technically, yes. But there's a whole bigger picture here. I don't think Rashford wants to come back to Man United, and I don't think Man United want Rashford to come back. So what we need to do is find a solution, hopefully Barcelona, but if not, somebody else. So I don't, in short, I don't see Rashford as a solution for Manchester United. And beyond that, all the noise that would come with it as well. The other option is, and again, it's in the same article, is Morgan Rogers and Elliot Anderson. The problem with Rodgers will be that the competition is even more fierce than for Anderson, but he's a player that United like. Look, Morgan Anderson's irrelevant, actually. I don't know why I mentioned Anderson. I think it's just because he was mentioned in the same pot as Rodgers in relation to... Rodgers is a more difficult deal than Anderson, and Anderson's very difficult. Someone like Morgan Rogers, do you go for a player that can play on the left wing, can play as a false 9 or a striker, but is predominantly number 10, but you've got Bruno there, so you use Rogers maybe as a foil to Sesko at times, or you put him on the left sometimes? I think you can do something like that. But for, I mean, and this is what I'm interested in your comments on this. What would you do? Because I actually do think I would rather just have a specialist striker who can do the job, rather than trying to be clever and use Mbeumo there, or Cunha there, or bring Rogers in and let's have lots of rotation. I think stability, consistency comes from structure and familiarity. And I think if Bruno's your 10, and Ahmad or Mbeumo are your right winger, and Cunha or Dorgu are your left winger, and Sesko's your striker, then the person you want to bring in is another striker. Morgan Rogers can play here, there and everywhere. You end up in a position where there's a lot of fluidity, but there's a not... How are you going to get consistency? One of the biggest issues we had last season was our fullbacks don't put crosses into the box. Our wingers don't put crosses into the box. And we have a huge striker who's brilliant in the air. If you look at us from set pieces, Bruno puts good crosses into the box. Casemiro, Maguire, Sesko get on the end of them. We need width to put crosses into the box, and that comes from consistency and structure. So, look, no doubt Morgan Rogers could come to Man United. I told you this a couple of weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago, in relation to things I know from Villa that Man United are very interested. £80 million, £90 million, £75 million, it's a lot of money to drop on a player that actually doesn't go into the... Not that he doesn't go into the team, but he doesn't get into the team in his best position. So, look, I think that what I'm saying is, if Morgan Rogers is going to cost £80 million, then I would use that £80 million on a left-back and a striker. So, 50-30 or 40-40. The key is, what type of striker are you going to get for 40 million? I mean, look, you know, talking about Aston Villa, Ollie Watkins is about to turn 30, or he might be about to turn 31. Ollie Watkins, for a couple of years at Man United, as a Champions League international striker, for a couple of years working alongside Sesko, people would say he's too old, but Danny Welbeck's 34. So, you know, Ollie Watkins, I think, would be quite an interesting person. Are there any other options out there that are like that, sort of aged between 27 and 32, that you can bring in for 30, 40 million pounds, who will compete with Sesko, but won't necessarily push him out of the team? And I think we do need something like that, if I'm being completely honest. Anyway, let me know your thoughts. Baleba, the striker situation, Morgan Rogers is an option there, maybe. The Rashford bit, if you want to. What I'm hoping is going to happen with Rashford, look, I'm doing an England watch-along tonight after the 8 o'clock show. What I'm hoping is going to happen with Rashford is that we get a bit of money for him and he gets a move that he wants. Because we haven't paid his wage for a year, so we don't want to be back paying that wage. Nobody wants to talk about this, but if Rashford comes back, it's more than 300 grand a week, I think, because of the Champions League. So you're paying a month 1.2 to 1.5 million a month, which across a year you're getting on for, you know, 12 to 15 million pounds in a season, which does impact your ability to do stuff. So look, moving Rashford on is good for him, it's good for us, but financially, not moving him on could impact what we want to do in the market anyway. So I think it's important that, you know, hopefully he'll do well in the World Cup and get the move he wants. Let me know your thoughts. Lots to get your teeth into there. Apologies we didn't get through that on the morning show, but I had to take Seb to his football match, so we ran out of time. But I did say I'd drop a full update because I don't want to be talking about this stuff at 8 o'clock. There's other stuff I want to talk about then. Take care, everyone. Stay safe. Smash a like. Get your comments in. I'll speak to you on the next one.